Hi, Vaughan. Welcome to 10 Minute Talks. I'm Harshadeva. Today's conversation is very special. We are talking about responsible peace building, informed by research and practice. Let me introduce my guest today.
I'm really pleased to be joined by Johanna Amaya-Panche, a scholar and practitioner whose work is at the intersection of international politics, peace, and lived realities on the ground. She's a senior lecturer in international relations and politics at Liverpool John Moores University and a British Academy Research Fellow. Her research looks at how international actors and local communities interact in conflict-affected settings with a strong focus on civil society, peace, resilience, and reconciliation, particularly in Latin America and cross-global South. Alongside her academic work, she has worked closely with organizations such as the United Nations and the European Union, helping bridge research and policy in real-world context. As a first-generation, mixed-race scholar from Global South, her journey brings a grounded and deeply human perspective to peace building today.
Welcome, Johanna. It's a pleasure to have you. And my first question is, you often talk about the role of civilian agency and making violence more visible. From your perspective, what should peace builders keep in mind to make sure their work truly supports communities and just not unintentionally cause harm?
Well, thank you for the invitation, first of all. Um, I think this is a very interesting question. In my work on foreign aid and civilian victimization, sorry, I argue that peace building is more protective when it strengthens civilian agency and makes violence visible in conflict and post-conflict settings, and in ways that can increase accountability without increasing exposure to risk. In this framework, civilian agency refers to ways civilians act collectively and strategically to protect themselves through local organization, nonviolent resistance, early warning systems, and most importantly, everyday negotiation with armed actors. And this matters because protection is not only delivered from the outside, it is also something civilians actively produce and sustain, often under intense constraints. So, from this perspective, peace builders should keep at least three issues in mind. First, support civilian agency without substituting it, because sometimes external interventions can reduce victimizations when they resource and strengthen what communities are already doing, enhancing coordination, enabling collective voice, and expanding civilian leverage. But by contrast, sometimes it can have some side effects. Interventions can cause harm when they impose fixed templates, centralized decision making, or perhaps they empower intermediaries, sometimes local governments, who weaken community autonomy and accountability. And second, as my research shows, making violence visible should be treated as a protective mechanism and not just simply as a documentation factor. Because visibility can protect when it raises the political and reputational cost of violence. It helps communities to mobilize external action, and it creates credible evidence for accountability. However, visibility can also create danger by exposing individuals and communities to retaliation or surveillance. So peace builders needs to keep these two factors in mind, and to protect civilians by creating informed consent, confidentiality, secure data management. They should care about what is shared publicly and clear understanding of who benefits from visibility and who bears the risk. And third, anticipate how aid reshapes local power and incentives. Because resource flows can trigger competition within communities, creating gatekeeping opportunities and change how armed actors interpret civilian behavior and alliances. So, a practical test for this is whether an intervention reduces civilian exposure to harm and strengthen collective peace efforts rather than unintentionally increasing vulnerability through political signaling or exclusion or capture.
Thank you. Doctor, you have worked both in academia and international organizations. Was there a moment in your career when you realized that research could genuinely influence how peace building is done on the ground?
Yes, and although it came in stages through practice and fieldwork, as you mentioned. So the first moment was when I worked at UNDP and met peace communities in Colombia that experienced made clear that communities are not waiting to be included in peace building. They are already building peace through collective strategies, often under direct threat. So it also showed me that what practitioners called support can feel very different locally, depending on whether it strengthens community priorities or introduces new constraints. So the second moment came later through my fieldwork research in conflict affected areas and in Colombia and Northern Ireland, where I encounter forms of civilian led peaceful resistance that is very well documented in the literature, communities defining their own rules, organizing collectively, and asserting nonviolent control over their territories and their social space. What stood out was not only the strength of these efforts, but the complexity of external environment around them. So when I was conducting fieldwork, I observed a recurring gap. We often know a lot about civilian resistance, as you may know, and local peace initiatives, but we know far less about how multiple donors and programs, international organizations operate simultaneously and how they affect local peace dynamics. So, on the ground, several actors may intervene at the same time, sometimes duplicating efforts, sometimes following conflicting theories of change, sometimes combining bottom up language with top down delivery, which is a very common practice that can dilute local ownership and civilian agency. It also can fragment coordination and even create unintended risk. That's where I felt research could make a clear contribution, not by debating whether it's work in general, but by tracing mechanisms, how particular forms of intervention interact with civilian agency and in turn shape patterns of protection or victimization.
All right. Based on your experience, what advice would you give to donors on how to support peace without doing harm?
Okay, well, of course, my advice is grounded in my trajectory as a practitioner and as a researcher. And I think external donors should fund peace in ways that protect and strengthen civilian agency, collective action, rather than overwhelming it. Practically, it means at least 4 things. First, donors should treat civilian protection as a core outcome, not as a secondary benefit. And this requires monitoring risk and harm, not only counting outputs. Second, donors should avoid crowding out. Civilian agency is a practice that requires autonomy, and sometimes financing parallel structures can affect or harm local civilian agency dynamics. Donors should resource existing community-led peace efforts and support the organizational capacities that allow them to endure. And third, donors should improve coordination. That is an important aspect. They should aim to reduce duplication and contradictions in their interventions. Where multiple programs operate at once, donors should ask whether their interventions are reinforcing the same protective mechanisms or pulling communities in different directions through competition approaches. And fourth, donors should assume that visibility sometimes is risky. If donors encourage reporting, monitoring, and public engagement, they must also fund the safeguards that make visibility protective rather than dangerous. So in short, donors do least harm and do the most good when they fund in ways that increase civilian leverage and reduce exposure to violence while respecting the collective peace strategies that communities have already built.
Thank you, Dr. Johanna. It was a pleasure to talking to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interview. It was very nice, very well-minded questions.